My name is Margaret, and there are certain kinds of silence that only widows understand. The world thinks silence is peaceful. Sometimes it is, but sometimes silence is not peace. Sometimes silence is the shape of absence. It is the space where a voice used to be. It is the empty corner of a room where laughter once lived. I have lived with that kind of silence for years. People around me moved forward. They had to. Life doesn't stop because one heart breaks. My children grew into their own lives. My grandson became a young man. The world outside my window kept changing seasons without asking me if I was ready. And I kept going too. I cooked, I cleaned, I paid bills, I smiled in conversations. I thanked people for checking in on me. I learned to live with fine. Fine became my favorite word because it ended questions quickly. But inside, there were nights when I lay in bed and missed my husband so deeply that it felt like an ache in my bones. Not the dramatic kind of grief people imagine in movies. Something quieter, something older. The kind of grief that sits inside your chest like a stone you carry everywhere, even when you laugh. My husband's name was Robert. I rarely say it out loud now because saying his name makes him feel close, and closeness can be painful when you cannot reach back. Robert had a voice that filled rooms. He wasn't loud in an arrogant way. He was simply present. When he spoke, you listened. When he laughed, the whole house felt warmer. He had a way of calling my name, Margaret, that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. After he passed, I learned that memory is both a gift and a wound. Sometimes I would hear his voice in my mind when I made tea the way he liked it. Sometimes I would expect to feel his hand on my back when I stood at the sink. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night and instinctively turn toward his side of the bed, only to meet cold emptiness. But I had not heard his real voice in years, not truly. Not the way it sounds when it comes from a living throat, not the way it sounds when it fills the air around you. I thought I was prepared for never hearing it again. I was wrong. It happened on an ordinary morning, the kind of morning where nothing suggests that your heart is about to reopen. I was cleaning a shelf in my living room. Slowly, carefully, the way older hands do everything. I dusted framed photographs and lined up books that had leaned out of place. I moved a small porcelain ornament Robert once brought me from a trip, a tiny lighthouse I always found charming. Behind the books, tucked into a corner I rarely touched, sat an old cardboard box. The box looked tired, worn at the edges. I didn't remember putting it there, but then again, the mind protects you by hiding certain things until you are ready. I pulled the box forward and brushed dust off the lid. A small label written in faded marker stared back at me. Memories. My breath caught. For a moment my hand rested on the lid as if I could feel time inside it. I told myself I should leave it alone. I told myself I didn't need to invite pain into my day. But curiosity, and something deeper than curiosity, made me sit down. I carried the box to the table near my window and opened it slowly. Inside were small pieces of my life, old photographs, a scarf, a holiday card Robert had written in his messy handwriting, a dried flower pressed between paper, a key I didn't recognize, a small cassette tape. I stared at the cassette tape like it was staring back at me. A cassette. I hadn't seen one in years. My fingers shook slightly as I lifted it. The label on it was written in Robert's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. That handwriting used to be on grocery lists, on notes he left near the kettle, on envelopes addressed to family. The label read, "For Margaret, just in case." My heart stopped. I stared at those words until they blurred. My throat tightened so suddenly I struggled to breathe. For Margaret, just in case. Just in case what? Just in case he didn't come home? Just in case he left this world before he could say goodbye properly? I pressed the cassette against my palm like I was holding his hand. Then I remembered the old voice recorder we once kept, a small device Robert used for work. I thought it was gone, but I searched the box again and found it beneath the scarf. It was there. My hands became clumsy with emotion. I held the recorder as if it might break from my trembling. I sat at the table, sunlight warm in my face, and stared at the play button. I was afraid, not because I didn't want to hear his voice, but because I did, because hearing it would make the absence unbearable again. Still, my finger moved toward the button, as if my body had decided before my mind could object. And then, with one small press, the recording began. At first, there was only static, the soft hiss of old tape, the kind that sounds like distant rain. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might drown everything else out. I held the recorder close, my fingers curled tightly around it. For a moment, I wondered if it would be silence forever, if the tape had been damaged, if time had erased the sound. Then I heard a faint movement, like someone clearing their throat. And then, "Margaret?" The voice was gentle, familiar, real. My whole body went cold and hot at the same time. I froze as if moving might break the moment. My hand flew to my mouth, not to hide a sob, but to keep myself from making any sound at all. I wanted to hear every breath, every pause, every tiny detail of him. "Margaret?" he said again, and the way he said it made me feel like I was standing in the kitchen on an ordinary evening, listening to him call me from another room. That voice carried everything I had missed: warmth, presence, safety. Then he chuckled softly, a little embarrassed. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I'm talking into a machine and it feels ridiculous." I let out a broken breath. That was him. Always honest, always a little awkward with big emotions, but willing to show them when it mattered. The recording continued. "If you're hearing this," Robert said, "then it means I'm not there to say it in person." My stomach tightened, my eyes blurred with tears instantly. He paused for a moment as if he was swallowing emotion. I could hear it in his breathing. "First," he said softly, "I need you to know something. I love you. I have always loved you, and I will always love you." A sound escaped me then, a small, wounded sob. I hadn't cried like that in a long time. It wasn't neat. It wasn't quiet. It was raw and sudden, like my heart had been holding back an ocean and this voice had opened the gate. Robert continued, his tone steady but tender. "You know me, Margaret," he said. "You'll be strong on the outside. You'll tell everyone you're fine. You'll try to make it easier for the kids. You'll keep the house clean and the tea warm. You'll keep going." I shook my head, tears streaming now. "Oh, Robert," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Oh, Robert." He let out another quiet chuckle, and it made me cry harder. "But listen to me, Margaret," he said, voice softening. "You don't have to be strong for me. Not always. If you need to fall apart, you fall apart. You hear me? You don't owe anyone bravery." His words struck me like light, because that was exactly what I had done after he died. I had kept my grief contained, controlled, polite. I had cried in private, wiped my face quickly, smiled before answering the phone. I had tried to be the kind of widow who didn't make other people uncomfortable. And Robert knew. Even before he was gone, he knew. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, and the sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. "I'm sorry I'm leaving you with this pain. If I could stay, I would. I'd stay until we were both old and cranky and laughing at ourselves in the kitchen." I let out a shaky laugh through tears. I could picture it. He would have said cranky. He loved that word. Then his voice became quieter, closer, as if he leaned toward the recorder. "I want you to remember something," he said. "You gave me a good life. You gave me a home that felt safe. You gave me love that never asked for applause. You loved me in the small ways that matter." The tape crackled slightly, and I clutched it tighter. I didn't want to lose a single syllable. "You know you don't always see yourself clearly," he continued. "You think you're just doing what you're supposed to do. You think anyone could do what you did. But they couldn't, Margaret. Not the way you did it. Not with that heart." I closed my eyes, tears dripping onto my hands, because in all my years I had never fully allowed myself to believe I was special. I believed I was responsible, useful, practical, but special? No, that word felt too big for someone like me. But Robert was telling me I was, and his voice made it feel true. Then the recording shifted again. I heard him inhale. "There's something else," he said, "something I want to say in case I never said it enough." I opened my eyes. My lips trembled. "Thank you," he whispered. Just 2 words, but they carried a whole life. "Thank you for choosing me," he said. "Thank you for staying when things were hard. Thank you for forgiving my mistakes. Thank you for making our children feel loved. Thank you for being my Margaret." My heart shattered open. I sobbed quietly now, no longer trying to control it. My shoulders shook. My chest ached. It felt like I was holding grief and love in the same hands, and both were too heavy. Then Robert's voice softened again, almost like he was praying. "When you miss me, don't punish yourself. Don't keep reliving the moment you lost me. Remember the life we had. Remember the jokes. Remember the Sunday mornings. Remember how we danced in the kitchen when no one was watching." I smiled through tears. We had danced, not like young lovers, like 2 tired adults who still found joy in small moments. "And Margaret," he added, "listen carefully. Don't close your heart. I know you'll want to. You'll think loving anyone else would betray me, but it won't. You're allowed to feel warmth again. You're allowed to laugh again. You're allowed to be held by this world." I tried, Robert," I whispered. The recorder played his final words on the tape, his voice slightly shaky now. "If you're listening to this, then I want you to do one thing for me. Go to the window, sit where you like to sit, and breathe. And when the sunlight touches your face, remember that I loved you in that light. I loved you in ordinary mornings. I loved you in quiet nights. And I am grateful." There was a pause. Then he said, "Goodbye, my love." And the tape ended. The hiss of static returned, but his voice was gone. I stared at the recorder in my lap, trembling all over. The room was silent except for my breathing and my quiet sobs. I felt as if I had just spoken to a ghost, but not a frightening one, a loving one, a familiar one, a ghost made of warmth. I pressed the recorder to my chest and rocked slightly, as if I could hold him that way. For years I had feared forgetting his voice. Now I knew I never truly could. But hearing it again, it was both a gift and a wound. And the deepest part of me understood something painful. Love does not end when people leave. It stays. It waits. It lives inside objects, inside rooms, inside recordings, and inside the heart of a woman who still misses him every day. The recording left a silence behind that felt different from the silence I lived with before. This silence was not only absence, it was presence too. As if Robert had walked through my living room for a moment, touched my memories gently, and then stepped back into wherever love goes when life ends. I sat there holding the recorder against my chest, tears still warm on my cheeks. My hands shook, not from age alone, but from the weight of what had just happened. I felt like I had been cracked open in the most tender way. After a while, I managed to place the recorder on the table. I wiped my face with the corner of my cardigan, the way women my age do, quietly, without drama, as if pretending the emotion is smaller makes it easier to survive. But my heart was louder than my habits. I stood up slowly and walked to the window, still trembling. Robert had told me to go to the window. He had pictured me here. He knew me so well it almost hurt. I sat down in my chair, the same chair where I had spent countless mornings drinking tea and watching the world move without him. The sunlight was softer now, leaning toward afternoon. It touched my face gently, warm and patient. And for a moment, I felt like Robert was sitting beside me. Not in a supernatural way, not in a ghost story way, just in the way memory can fill a space so completely that the absence doesn't feel empty anymore. I looked down at my hands in my lap and whispered softly, "I heard you today." My voice sounded small in the quiet room, but it was real. I glanced at the recorder on the table. I wanted to press play again immediately, to keep his voice alive, to drink it like water, but something inside me stopped me. I knew if I replayed it over and over, it would become an addiction, a way to avoid moving forward. And Robert had not recorded that message for me to remain trapped in grief. He recorded it to set me free. Still, freedom is complicated, because part of me did not want to be free. Part of me wanted to stay in that moment forever, the moment when his voice called my name and the world felt complete again. I sat quietly and let the grief move through me like a wave. I didn't rush it. I didn't wipe it away quickly. I let it exist the way Robert told me to. You don't owe anyone bravery. So I allowed myself to cry fully, slowly, honestly. And when the tears finally began to calm, I noticed something underneath them. Gratitude. Not the forced kind people say at funerals. The real kind. The kind that feels like warmth spreading through the chest. Because I had loved him, and I had been loved. Not everyone gets that. Some people live a whole life without being called my love in a voice that means it. Some people never experience the comfort of a partner who knows them deeply. But I did. Robert had loved me in ordinary mornings and quiet nights. He had loved me when I looked tired, when my hair was messy, when life was heavy. He loved me. And even though it ended in death, it was still real. I took another deep breath and turned toward the shelf where our photographs were. I stood and walked over slowly. There was one photo I always kept in front, Robert and I in the kitchen. Someone had taken us without us noticing. We were laughing at something, my head tilted back slightly, his eyes bright. The photo wasn't perfect. It was slightly blurred, but it captured what mattered. Joy. I lifted the photo frame and held it against my chest the way I had held the recorder. "I miss you," I whispered. Then I added quietly, "But I'm still here." Saying those words felt important, because being a widow can make you feel like you are living in the shadow of a life that ended. It can make you feel like you are a leftover piece of a story that is no longer being told. But Robert's message had reminded me of something. I am not leftover. I am living. I returned to the table and opened a notebook. A blank page waited for me like a gentle invitation, and in that moment I knew what I needed to do. I needed to speak back, not into a machine, the way Robert did, but onto paper, the way women have always spoken to the dead when the living world cannot hold their grief. I picked up my pen, my fingers steadying, and wrote, "Dear Robert, I heard you today." The words came easily after that. They poured out like water that had been held behind a dam. I wrote about the way my knees still ached in winter, about how the house was quiet without him humming, about how I still caught myself saving the last piece of cake as if he might want it, about how I missed the sound of his shoes at the door. Then I wrote the truth that hurt most. I wrote that I had been lonely. Not always, not every day, but enough to feel the weight. And then I wrote something I had never admitted before. I wrote that I had been angry sometimes, angry that he left, angry that I had to learn to be alone, angry that life didn't offer us more time. As soon as I wrote it, shame tried to rise, but I pushed it away. Robert told me not to punish myself. Love includes anger sometimes. That doesn't make love smaller. It makes it real. Then I wrote about my children, how proud he would be, how they were growing and living, how they still carried him in their smiles. I wrote and wrote until the page was full. Finally, my hand slowed. My chest felt lighter, not because grief vanished, but because it had moved. I placed the pen down and looked at what I had written. Then I whispered, "Thank you." Not just to Robert, to life, to love, to the years we had. As the day faded into evening, I returned to my window again. The recorder sat safely in its box, not hidden, but resting, like a sacred object, like a small door to the past that I could open gently when I needed warmth, not desperation. The sky outside turned soft and gold. Warm light filled the room, and I felt a calm settle over me. I understood something now. Love doesn't leave. It changes form. It becomes memory. It becomes handwriting. It becomes a voice inside a machine. It becomes a quiet strength in a widow's heart. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to remember this. Grief is not proof that you are broken. Grief is proof that you loved, and love is never something to be ashamed of. And when you miss someone, let yourself miss them. Don't rush your healing. Don't hide your tears. Let love speak, even if it is only through whispers in an empty room. That night I sat by the window with warm light on my silver hair. I rested my hands in my lap, breathing slowly. My face still held the marks of tears, but my heart felt strangely steady. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of love. I smiled gently, the kind of smile that arrives after pain has been honored, because I had heard my late husband's voice again, and even though it broke my heart, it also reminded me that I was loved.